Hello everyone, I'm Luke Melky. Today we're going to talk about the techniques of making a film look old. When I mean old, I mean like the films my dad used to watch.
Scene 12, take 4.
Making a film feel truly old is more than just throwing a black and white filter or maybe a sepia filter on it. Today we're going to talk about 5 techniques to make your film truly feel authentically old.
So frame rate is one of the things that's really, really important in making a film feel old. Films are usually shot in 24 frames a second. It gives a nostalgic feel a little bit. It feels just a little bit different. And 30 frames a second has its own feel as well. That's usually used more for things like YouTube and videos and commercials. Things like that are usually at 30 frames. It's a little bit smoother. But in the old times, we're shooting it at 10 to 12 frames a second. It gives it that little bit of jitter. It was way cheaper and way easier to work with back in the day. But it has that feel of it's just not very smooth. Then we have to make sure it's not only that jittery feeling of low frames, we have to have cuts. It's got to feel like a few frames just skip every now and then. Because without that skip feel, it doesn't feel quite as real. Then we also have to think about the grain that happened in the film. They didn't have as good technology as we have today, obviously. So their film wasn't quite as perfect. It had stuff in it. It wasn't a pure film. It had grain. It had artifacts in the film, and just caused a look that we all know as the old film, that flow flicker feel that comes with old film. So then we also have to think about what type of color is it. Obviously, black and white is what we think of. The technically is more accurate as to what they made back then. But as film ages, the film itself literally will start to change color. It starts getting that sepia tone look. So it's more accurate to have a black and white as if you would have watched it then, but a lot of the film has aged like a good cheese and turned a little bit sepia colored. But we went with the sepia look to make it appear that the film has aged as if the film was actually recorded 100 plus years ago.
So here we are at the ranch. Talking about our next part is the aspect ratio. Now, what is the aspect ratio? It's kind of the box of where your film is actually being recorded. So there's a few different ways we can do this. If we wanted the film to look like it was maybe from the 60s or 70s, old Western, we would have a really wide aspect ratio because they went to the really wide, sometimes 2:1, which isn't super wide, but then sometimes they're stretching at 3, sometimes even 4:1. They're really trying to get that wide, what we consider cinematic look. But if you go further back, we have the 4:3 aspect ratio. That's what we decided to shoot in for this one because we wanted to be a really old looking film. We didn't want just stuff from the 60s. We wanted to look like it was one of the original early films. So real quick side note here, why do we have 16:9 aspect ratio as a standard today? It actually goes back to the movie theaters. When people were starting to get TVs in their home, they were 4:3 in those big box TVs. And films were having problems getting the ticket sales at theaters because people were watching it in their home TVs. So I thought if they could make it a wider screened image, it would mean the home TV would have to be much bigger to get that wide aspect ratio to make it work, but it didn't bother the movie theaters. They could just stretch it out and make it wide pretty easily. It also is more pleasing to the human eye having a wider, because that's just kind of how we see the world, is more wide. But the main reason is because TVs were not able to do widescreen as well, so they switched a lot of things to extra wide to make it difficult for people to watch the film at home.
So sound is another huge part of making a film. A lot of people say that sound is more than half of the story. I go back and forth whether I think it's more than half or just half. But either way, it is incredibly important. So the old film has its own sound. It has kind of a tinny, crackly sound. But also we think of it having the projector running. Because if you had to go to an old theater, when they had the film running, you would actually hear the machine. But then we also have to think about the music that was used with some of these films. We are doing the Western film, so it really isn't quite accurate to what they were shooting 100 plus years ago when they were using the organs. That a lot of times in these theaters, they actually had an organist playing in the theater an original music every single time the film was played. We didn't do that. We used the music of what we think of as a Western from like the 60s and 70s, and we threw it back into the old times to give it that feel of what we expected it would feel, but it isn't technically quite accurate.
So we talked about what makes a film feel old, but how can we mimic that with our modern digital 8K cameras? Well, this is how we did it.
So how do we get that low frame rate when our camera doesn't record that low? It records higher, but doesn't record lower than 24 frames a second. So what we did is we created a subsequence, some of you might call a sub-timeline, and I put the settings of that sequence to 10 frames a second to give it that low frame rate of 10 frames a second. But the other thing that's also important in some of these old films is that kind of jitter, cuts, kind of jumps. So what we did to mimic that is something normally you want to hide when you edit, but I actually wanted to use that. I used jump cuts in a film. Normally those aren't used in films. They're used in YouTube videos kind of like this, and like this, and like this. But it's not really good for a smooth storytelling. But in this situation, I wanted to actually have those jump cuts. It gave it that feeling of those jumps. So I would actually cut out if someone had a mistake or too long of a pause in the lines, I would actually cut that and splice them together from the same camera angle to make it feel like something jumped in the recording, which was perfect because it made it easy for acting. Me as a director knowing that if that line wasn't quite right, that was okay. I was going to actually use that to help tell the story better. All right, so give us that old time feel. We didn't just slap the black and white. This is what it shot in the camera. I wasn't too worried about the color balance here because I knew it was going to go black and white before we did anything else. So if the coloring wasn't quite right, raw, I was fine with that. I didn't really care that much. So we had our adjustment layer here. We actually had it go black and white first. Then we added a couple of these other effects here. So this is original. We added a lumetri color to give a little bit more range what I wanted. Then we give the LDR NOR effect, so it makes it black and white, and it gives a low dynamic range, so it kind of compresses a little bit. Then we added this here, the golden western, to give it a little bit of sepia feel. It wasn't enough sepia feel, I didn't think, so I actually added a sepia colored layer on top of it. And when we did this, I put it as an overlay, so the color would actually change. If I just had it normal, that looks kind of odd like that, I put it back to overlay, so it actually impacts some of the colors a little bit more, and put it 70%, because 100% was just a little bit too much. I don't want it to look orange. I want to have it that faded sepia look. Then we added a layer here. This is a film flicker that I downloaded online. So there's a bunch of these online. I don't even remember where I got mine. So then now there's a little bit of that flicker as we move through here. You can see the film is starting to flicker. So now it looks much more legit old film.
So we edited our film in 4:3 aspect ratio. But do you know why old films were in 4:3? The main reason is a lot of film was actually taken from film cameras where you take still pictures, and their standard was 4:3. Now I can't tell you the history behind why that was 4:3, but that's why cinemas were using 4:3, is they were taking photography film, put it into rolls, and that's why they had 4:3. Another reason that we went to 4:3 is in this space, it's kind of difficult because we don't have a lot of space in this room to do a wide aspect ratio. We have a lot of clutter in the area that, yes, we could have moved it out, but this was an active restaurant when we were shooting this. So we wanted to make sure we weren't taking over too much space for the patrons to actually be able to use the space and enjoy the restaurant. So doing 4:3 helped us work with this smaller environment and allowed us to actually move and crop the image in post to get rid of clutter and stuff that was in the background. So when we shoot in 4:3, there's a few different ways we can do this. One is you can shoot it natively within the camera. The other option is you can actually record in the wider aspect ratio, which is what we did, and then crop it in post. We recorded in 8K and we were able to bring it down to a 4:3 aspect ratio pretty easily.
So there's a few different ways we can do the 4:3 recording. One is we can do it natively within the camera, but since this is a Canon R5C, it can't actually do that when we record in RAW. Smile.
Another way we can do aspect ratios, we can actually have an external monitor, kind of like this Ninja Flame here, and it will actually show what the different aspect ratios will look like. I didn't do that for a couple reasons. One, it's just extra space and we don't have a lot of space in here. Two, it just takes more time to put it up and we didn't have a lot of time to do this production. Three, a lot of times it takes an extra person just to manage an external monitor and we didn't have the extra crew. And four, we want to make this something that other people can mimic. They can actually make productions like we do. So we want to show everything we're doing, make it simple enough that other people can follow along. So what we did is we just guessed what it was going to look like. And I've done enough of this kind of stuff. I have a pretty good idea what it looks like. I ended up being right.
When we were shooting with aspect ratios, we were shooting 8K RAW, which gives us a huge control of whatever aspect ratio we want to shoot in later. I was shooting a little bit wide. I know some of you were thinking that was probably overkill, and it probably was. But I knew I was going to be doing a lot of artificial zooming in post. So I shot it wide, allowing me to go in. It also gave me wiggle room. If I didn't hit that 4:3 exactly as I thought it would look, it gave me some wiggle room to adjust the image in post and not lose my image. So when we put it down to 4:3, we actually put it into what you could say is the HD version of it, because it wasn't our 4K traditional setup, because I wanted to have that little bit lower resolution to give that little more nostalgic feel. I didn't want to go super low resolution because then it just looks awful. So this is our first non-4K film release in a decade. I don't even know. It's been a long time. So yes, sound is a huge part of making this feel real. So what did we do to make this actually feel like it was an old film with the sound? Well, we started off with having that classic projector rolling sound, the classic Western music, and the caw of the bird. Ah! I didn't make my own sound effects. I used real sound effects for this, so don't worry. But I didn't want to keep the real classic sound of film all the way through the film, because that can actually get really harsh and really old on the ears rather quick. The eyes will see something and they're forgiving with how some things look and it feels nostalgic. The sound of bad sound is just grating. So I started the film off with a lower quality sound with the projector sound, and I let that fade out into clear, crisp audio because I don't want it to be painful to listen to. There's some of the old parts of film that nostalgic look that are fun. The sound was not. So we only used it for a portion of the film and we let it actually fade out so it wouldn't be torturous to listen to the whole time. There you have it. That's how we made our film look like it was old. Hope you stay tuned to our YouTube channel or go to the local theater here and watch it on the big screen. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you don't miss the notifications that the film is released later this month.